Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. It is me once again, screaming into the void of the internet. I just had a really nice conversation about classical music and video games and stuff like that. And so it almost, makes me a little bit sad to make a video like this. But, I just kind of wanted to talk about this and get this off my chest because, um, I saw this video about this chick basically giving her son a hard time because he lost his job. And I've been wanting to talk about humanity overall and some very uncomfortable things that people don't want to admit that I will openly admit. Um and I'm sorry that I'm saying this a lot because I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I'm going to use several groups and talk about humanity overall, as well as some very uncomfortable things that people are not willing to say, but I'm going to say them. Okay. So let's just go ahead and start off with a group that, I am air quotes a part of, even though I don't really claim them. Blizzax. I'll try and keep it as, YouTube friendly as I can, right? Because I really want this to reach as many people. I will probably put this on Rumble as well, just in case, but this will be on YouTube as well. So, there are a lot of problems in the Blizzax community, and people will often ask, how does someone like me, how does someone like anyone, for example, like grow up in that and end up the way that we are? And I don't really have answers for you. All I can really say is I do think that it is a bit of an intelligence thing. I don't mean that in the sense that I am some kind of genius. I mean in the sense where I think you have to have a certain level of intelligence to acknowledge things for like what they are. Like being part of a flock, whatever that flock may be, whether it's, kind of crazy people, drug dealers or whatever, that is something that people usually want. And they don't really like to count the costs of what do I have to pay to maintain some kind of social cohesion, right? They just remain a part of the group at any cost. And for us, and I don't just speak for myself, but, for anyone who is an outsider, whether, you're a part of a family that celebrates the military and you're someone who doesn't like the military, whether you're a part of a conservative family and you're a liberal, or you're a part of a liberal family and you're conservative, like this isn't going to be political, but I'm just, making an example. You have to get to a certain point where you're comfortable, having your own opinion around people, regardless of how that's going to like get you treated. And when it comes down to the Blizzak community, intelligence is shunned. Intelligence is shunned. Uh, you know, Doomers and Black Pillars are gonna really love this because this is gonna be a topic that they're familiar with. When it comes down to I guess incels, if you will, criminals are the ones who are rewarded, with intercourse and stuff like that. They're rewarded with sex. So a lot of men in that community feel like the only way that they can, get some is by being a criminal. And unfortunately, like I have mentioned many times, men men don't really seem to have a personality a lot of times. They like to mold themselves into whatever gets them laid. And that's very heartbreaking, especially when it comes down to the Blizzax community, because I have witnessed it in my life in high school, where there were people who were smart and they purposefully made themselves look stupid just to fit in. And I am guilty of this in a certain aspect, but not in the way that people might think. I never chose to do wrong, shall we say, like on grades or like tests. I tried to do the best that I can in school, but to avoid the bullying and the gangs and stuff like that, I did, kind of try and talk like, ratchet and stuff like that. And I could blend in pretty well. But that was never me. I hated, there were things that I just couldn't, blend in with. Like, I could adopt the speech in a certain aspect, but I couldn't adopt the culture. I couldn't celebrate crime. I couldn't I couldn't celebrate the garbage rap music. I couldn't celebrate that stuff. There were certain things that I, just couldn't keep the act up. But I'm bringing this up because, like I mentioned, this video that I was looking at, it reflects something about the community where this mom was essentially pimping out her son, telling him that he needs to get a job, and she was mad that he lost his job. There was no comfort to him. There was no like concern, like, it's okay, son, we're just gonna get another job. And it's important to note that it was the mom because the Blizzax community is a matriarchy. It is a matriarchy on every level that you can imagine. Okay, like those guys, a lot of times who are criminals and get arrested, they got arrested because 9 times out of 10, there was a chick involved. And that's something that people don't want to admit. But I would argue that if you sat down a whole bunch of criminals who were somewhat civilized in order to, talk, and they weren't just acting like a bioweapon 24/7, and they were willing to admit what got them locked up, it would probably trace to a girl in some capacity. It would, especially in this community. Because again, for them, being a criminal secures a mate, and so that's something that, a lot of guys in this space love to hear about, mate selection and all that good stuff. And so it's a very big deal. But I'm bringing this up because it's a prime example of why matriarchies are not good. Because there is no long-term, consequences that they think about when they're in control. It's just all immediate gratification, and they don't see long term. And that's not necessarily something that is unique to the double X chromosome. Okay, that a lot of people suffer from this, but it is especially prevalent in this community. So if you ever want to see what a matriarchy looks like, you go ahead and look at ours, and it ain't pretty. There's a reason why I'm not among those people. There's a reason, and it's a shame because, like the video that I was watching mentioned, there are guys in that space that are stuck. And I felt like one of them for a very, very long time, where all you have around you is crime, and all you have around you are just people that have given up and they just don't try and be good anymore. And I've mentioned this before, you are as good as you can afford and as bad as you can get away with, but there are just some people that just don't want to do that stuff. They don't want to. And you see these guys who they like to call nerds and tease him, and they just want to watch anime and they just want to play video games and they don't want to be a part of that community. And it's very sad that they get caught up in that stuff. I openly admit that, there could come a day where I have saved up enough money and, maybe I want to take a trip to Japan or like some kind of Asian country, and maybe one day I would get banned just because of like how I look and stuff like that. And I don't think it's because of gracism like people want to claim. It's literally just because overall, consistently speaking, the Blizzax community has proven that they don't want to be better. And I say this again as somebody who had a great conversation. One of the conversations that I just had over here as I got dropped off, with my Uber driver, was a concept about video games and world building and classical music. Like he didn't judge me because of the color of my skin and stuff like that. We just shared a common interest. We made a conversation. And unfortunately, a lot more people are going to be driven off by that because of how, Blizzax have chosen to present themselves. And even the ones who claim that they are good and stuff like that, right? They consistently defend the ones who are bad. So it doesn't help the stereotype at all. It really doesn't, So I'm using that just as a starter because I am going to talk about humanity overall, but I'm talking about this from a very important perspective. A lot of people claim that you need to be the change that you want to see. But the truth of the matter, guys, is the only person that can change anything is usually yourself in terms of like your immediate circumstances. And even then it's arguable because, like you can't just lose an arm and then just say, well, I'm just going to have an arm now. That's just not how that works, right? But I'm talking about this because I'm trying to make a point here. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, especially like, let's say the Epstein files, for example. And I'm not even sure if I could say that without getting like freaking flagged as a conspiracy theorist or demonetized or whatever. Not that I have any monetization to begin with, right? But, there's this idea that a lot of people claim that they are angry and they are resentful and stuff like that. And I'm going to say something that's very hard for a lot of people to hear. I doubt you're angry. Because if you're really angry, you take action. And I'm going to say the thing that a lot of people are not comfortable saying. I'm very displeased with a lot of stuff going on in the world, right? But I am also, and I'm just openly calling myself out here, guys, I am not willing to put myself in a position to lose what little happiness I have learned to obtain here. You know, I have been miserable claiming that everything is okay for a very, very long time. And I'm sure that a lot of other people can attest to stuff like that, right? Where perhaps they had awful childhoods, perhaps they had terrible parents, and they have finally reached a point where they're happy. You know, maybe they started a family, like the guy that I was talking with on my Uber ride, right? And for those people, you know, who have something to lose, and even in the instances where people believe that they don't have anything to lose because, oh, I don't have a family and stuff like that, you know, I don't share that belief at all because, you know, the little bit of peace that I have here, guys, you know, not being in the hood, not being in the ghetto, and, you know, just having this peace, you know, I wouldn't want to lose it. And I'm openly willing to say this again, like, I wouldn't really want to risk this little bit of happiness that I have. That's not to say that I wouldn't ever. You know, that's not necessarily the case. And I do think that there is a certain line that people have. But over the, let's just say, centuries, okay? Because literally, like, if we go back a few centuries, not even thousands of years, just a few centuries, people were willing to do a lot just on the accusation of things, right? And it's very interesting to watch these cases for the whole Epstein files and stuff like that, and how angry people claim to be, but nothing is happening, you know. And it's very amusing because America likes to tote itself on how important, you know, like guns are and stuff like that, so you can, you know, resist tyranny. And I do agree, you know, like I don't think that I want to live somewhere else, despite how, you know, I could geomax and get a wife and have a family overseas and stuff like that. Yes, my life would probably objectively get easier in terms of like getting a mate or, you know, like getting property and stuff like that. It would get easier, but I would lose my ability to defend my family if something happened, right? And guns are a thing where you want to have them and never have to use them. You know, you want to have them and never have to use them. You know, I would honestly hope that I would never have to deal with a break-in or harm someone if I had to, you know, if I can avoid it. But I am not against it because I know that I don't live in a safe world, you know. The truth of the matter is, I am not entitled to safety. Nothing is. The world that we live in is a very dark, evil, vile place. And even if you want to just go ahead and exclude evil as a concept, nature is not pretty. Okay, nature does not care if you are a newborn animal or whatnot. You will get eaten alive. You know, like that. It's not a pretty world. You know, so like this idea that you're always going to be safe is just not a thing. And so, for better or worse, you know, guns are here, and I would rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. You know, but America, despite all of the ammunition that it has, despite the fact that it could probably face off, like the citizens alone in America, right? You know, they could probably fight off certain militaries if like they decided to invade. Like they could probably help fight them off. Nothing is being done. You know, like there was this meme going around last year about 100 men in a gorilla, right? And I saw a very funny meme that was kind of like parodying that. And it said, people are talking about 100 men versus one gorilla, but there are 8 billion people versus a couple thousand billionaires, and we're losing. And that's true. That is absolutely true, because at the end of the day, we outnumber those people, guys. We outnumber the people who are evil in terms of like the vile stuff that they're doing, like, you know, the experimental, how should I even word this? The experimental, shall we say, modern medicine, okay, if you catch my drift, that they, you know, test on like these third worlders and stuff like that, right? And you can look into this if you want to. I'm not going to say certain names because it's YouTube and I know what will happen, but there's a lot of stuff that these people do over the years and they get away with. And even when people say, well, we've got to expose them, that's not going to do anything. Because the truth is that if you really wanted this to stop, if you really want this to change, the truth is you basically have to go Warhammer. You got to start, let's just be real, taking skulls. And if you're not going to, these people could care less that you expose them, because what are you really going to do? You know, we live in a world now where the person, the raider, shall we say, is not the person who's like, charging you with a sword and a shield and armor. He's walking up to you in a suit and saying, by the law, I'm going to take something from you and you can't do anything. Because the law says. And just because the law says does not make it right. Okay? Because the truth of the matter is might makes right. And right now those people have the might. Not because they are stronger than you, but they have, laws in place that protect them to take your stuff. That enable them to take your stuff. It doesn't mean that they are right. Might does not mean that it's right. It makes it right because force, you see. And force only works if people choose to not meet that force with force of their own. Because like I mentioned, there are a lot more of us than there are of those people. But we're losing. Because the truth of the matter is, like I mentioned, like a lot of us do not really feel like risking things. And I can't blame anyone. I can't blame you if you don't feel like taking an unnecessary risk that could potentially rob you of any other happiness that there is to have in this life. And there's a lot of misery in this life, guys. If you're in this space, if you're in the doomer space, you guys have been we have all just been dealt a very, very bad hand. I was listening to a guy talk about how, his parents basically just didn't help him in anything. They didn't teach him in any way. And I told him that, hey, I could relate. Because even though I didn't get thrown out on my behind, it doesn't change the fact that there were a lot of things that they could have taught me. There were a lot of things that they could have helped me with, and they chose not to. And a lot of us in this space are similar. Our parents were probably people that really shouldn't have had kids. They had them anyway, even though they knew that they didn't have any resources, and they just decided to wing it. And winging it has literally it's just made our lives terrible. Respectfully speaking, it's just made our lives terrible. They didn't leave us any inheritances. They didn't leave us anything. They just left us with a whole bunch of expectations, said that, hey, you're the miracle child, you're special, now you got to make it happen. And they put all of it on us, and they have completely absolved any accountability on their own part when it comes down to helping us, achieve our goals, And you see that, and you just have to look at this from a standpoint of, this is really just a song and dance of humanity, humanity claims to care about things. They claim to care about what is right and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is humanity really only cares about what's in control. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have to worry about these things because we would self-govern. My apologies. My alarm went off, so sorry about that. But in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to worry about these things, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the world. And there are a lot of issues that come with living, in this world, I have the, belief at this point, guys, that humanity just wants to have someone govern over them. Not because it's what they really want, but when things start going wrong, they have someone to shift the blame to. Because once upon a time, when it was kind of not necessarily entirely self-governance, when things go wrong, you don't really have anyone to blame, And having someone to blame makes things a lot easier for a lot of people. It makes it easier to cope. Because, well, this isn't my fault, this is your fault. You're the one in charge, and this has happened, Perhaps that is why people clung to religion and stuff like that so strongly at one point. Hey, well, God is the reason why this is the way that it is, so we can't complain about bad harvest. The God sent a plague or whatever, who knows. But I'm talking about this because it's a very sad thing that we live in a world where, in a way, people could have tons of potential, The keyword is could. But most of them will be stifled due to their environment, due to where they grew up, their culture and stuff like that. And just straight up due to lack of opportunity. We live in a world that we could try, at least, right, to give people opportunities in terms of like education and stuff like that. Those who are willing, okay? You can't force this on people, right? But those who are willing, and that is not what goes down. Because what goes down is people don't really want an educated population, you know? They want a working class. Shut up, you know, go ahead and wage slave, be a good little boy, and accept what we give you. At one point, did we give you enough to take care of your family? Yeah. But those days are over. So you shut up and just get what we give you. That's really all that they want, you know? And again, despite how much people claim to have a problem with it, the truth of the matter is that if you are not going to rise up against your oppressors, if you are not about to like just straight up again start going Bloodborne, not Bloodborne, but Warhammer and start taking skulls, it's they could care less about the words because hey, listen, the truth is they've got you so enslaved. Because you know, I'll never forget this scene from Death Note. They all claimed that hey, listen, you better get away from Kira. That's our god, right? And in a scene that was very ironic, from that helicopter, when they were like escaping the stampede of people, they threw money. And those people said, money! They screamed and just started picking it up. Because if you really want to know the truth, that is humanity's God right now. Money. Money. For all of the crap that all these people who claim to be against, like, you know, the billionaires and all this stuff, if those people were looking all of humanity in the face and they threw currency, everyone would start just screaming and fighting with each other to pick it up. That's the worst part. You know, like, you're enslaved and you don't even have physical shackles. I wouldn't do it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I wouldn't do it, you know, but I'm just one person. And maybe you guys wouldn't either, but we do not represent most of the people, you know? It's a shame. But I really wanted to get this off my chest because, you know, guys, I want you guys to understand something. You may feel like failures, you know, like I was listening to some horrible stuff about, you know, someone who was in this space for a while and he took his own life in a very painful manner that I'm not going to say, but you don't have to blame yourself for what's going on in life. Now, that is not to say that you do not have any accountability, okay? I will never lie to you and say that you are completely faultless. You know, if there is something that you could have changed and you chose not to do it, you know, you have to take responsibility, but that doesn't change the fact that things have been made objectively harder. We are working so much harder for so much less, guys. You know, as much as I like my little room and whatnot, would I prefer to have like a house to myself? Of course I would, of course. But that's not the world I live in, you know? And so I do what is easiest for me to, you know, help grow wealth. And I would hope that before this year is over, you know, before this year is over, I would hope, keyword here, to maybe get very close to having, say, 5 figures in the bank account. If, you know. But if not, if I can get pretty close, I'll be happy with that too, you know. I'll be happy with that too. Because there are things that are not in my control, of course. But there are things that are in my control, you know. So I'm going to choose to try and take advantage of what is in my control to put myself in a good position, you know. But that's pretty much all I had to say, guys. I really just wanted to get that off my chest because it's a shame. It's a shame to look at like people who could be so much better if, you know, they at least were just given a chance. And they're not even going to be given a chance just because of the fact that, well, their culture doesn't care, you know. You know, if you're a Blizzax and stuff like that, for the most part, yeah, you can get out, but the only way that you're ever really going to be given a shot is if you just basically get away from those people. And it's a shame, but there's nothing you can do about it, you know. If you're an individualist and, you know, like you've got a liberal or a conservative family demanding that you behave a certain way, like you're never really going to be given a chance until you get away. You know, and even if you're like, say, someone who's just willing to tell the truth like me, about like stuff like this, about like the files, and how, hey, respectfully speaking, a lot of people don't really care. Because if you cared, something would change. You'd be willing to risk your peace because the change was that important to you. That is the truth. The people that truly wanted change across history, they were willing to sacrifice peace. And people today are not willing to do that. So, despite how it makes you feel, if it's not making you take action, can you truly say that you care? You know? That's something to consider. And it's a very humbling thought, guys, because this is what I will always say, guys. I don't believe I'm a good person. I don't really believe that there are any good people. And I do not say this to say that you are a horrible human being. But there is always more that someone can do. And the truth of the matter, guys, is that, again, if we really cared, we would take action. We are complicit in a lot of the filth that is taking place across the society because, again, we're not willing to sacrifice the peace. Not willing to do it. So you can't really claim that you're absolutely innocent. You can say, hey, well, I don't got anything to do with it at all. Are you? You sure? You are aware of who the person is. And none of us take action, myself included. I'm just willing to take part of the blame, you know. I may not be doing the evil, but I am certainly aware that it's happening and I'm doing nothing about it. There's something to say about it. But I'm going to go ahead and conclude it here because I could keep talking, but I am very tired and this was just on my mind for a few days, and I really feel like this is a video that I need to get out there, you know. What are your thoughts on that, guys? You know, like, I feel like that's a, air quotes, brutal, you know, black pill right there, you know. Because a lot of the fact is that a lot of people who claim the black pill, it's like, they just start and stop on relationships, but I feel like there's so much more to discuss. Because for me, you know, black pill, red pill, blue pill, whatever, it's just elements of truth, and the truth to me is very little about relationships. It's everything about human nature, you know. Human nature that people really do not like talking about, do not like confronting, because it's ugly. But I'm someone who will always prefer to know, you know. I would. But that's it, folks. That's it. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. What are your thoughts on these kinds of things, guys? Do you guys think about this? I feel like a lot of people in this space do kind of think very deeply, so I would like to know what you think, you know? I want to thank you guys for watching, and sorry if this is a bit of a bummer video, you know? But I do kind of have to, like, you know, get it out my system. These are very good for my mental health, and I feel like talking about these things help us give different perspectives, and we can learn about each other. So, again, what's your thoughts? I hope that you guys are hanging in there. How are you guys doing? If you are more than happy to share your opinions on how your health is, you know, please share them. I do care. I do care, folks, you know. Want to stress again, there is life beyond your pain. You know, when I heard that, you know, a guy in this space, like, took his life in a terrible way because he wanted to feel as much pain as possible, you know, like, there's life beyond your pain, guys. I don't just say this because it's an outro and I don't mean it. I genuinely mean it, guys. I came from a very, very bad space and I'm doing a lot better. And it's only because I, you know, toughed it out. You know, I'm not going to pretend like it was easy. I'm not going to pretend like it was pleasant, but things changed because I stuck around, and I just hope that you guys are going to stick around too. You know, I can't force you to. No one can, but I do hope that you stick around at least to try and change things, you know. Like I will say, you know, let's endure the bad days so that we can enjoy the good ones, you know. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. I'll see you in the next one.